Have you ever seen a relationship just completely flip? Going from, cautious distance to a really tight partnership. It's fascinating when that happens between countries. And today, well, that's the journey we're tracing with India and the United States. We've gathered a whole stack of your sources, articles, research, expert analyses, and we've boiled them down to give you the key insights. Think of it as a shortcut to understanding this really critical global strategic partnership.
It really is a compelling story. You're charting this course from, well, deep mistrust, even estrangement, to what we now call a comprehensive strategic alliance. And understanding this shift, it's absolutely essential, isn't it, given its huge impact on global geopolitics, trade, tech, security, everything in the 21st century, really.
Yeah. It's almost hard to believe now, but for decades, the India-U.S. relationship was, well, distant, sometimes even suspicious. So how do we get from there to here? Let's unpack that surprising history a bit. Think back, Cold War era, India's independence in '47, right up to the early '90s. Ideology was a big wedge, wasn't it? India had its policy of non-alignment, trying to stay clear of the U.S. bloc and the Soviet bloc. But the U.S., focused on containing communism, often looked at that non-alignment with, let's say, suspicion. They kind of saw it as leaning towards Moscow, maybe?
Exactly. From Washington's perspective back then, India's non-alignment felt less like a strategic choice for a new nation and more like, well, a refusal to pick a side in that big ideological fight. And that perception, it really colored the relationship for decades. Plus, you had the U.S. alliance with Pakistan. That was a huge point of friction for India.
A direct threat, really.
Right. The U.S. was giving military aid to Pakistan, and then during the 1971 India-Pakistan War, U.S. support for Pakistan, that really concerned New Delhi, and it pushed India closer to the Soviet Union for its defense needs for technology.
And it wasn't just geopolitics, right? India's nuclear tests, '74 and '98, those triggered U.S. sanctions. That really highlights the lack of trust back then. And economically, ties were pretty minimal.
Very minimal. It's like they were operating in different spheres almost. That whole Cold War dynamic just created this really strong barrier. These historical choices, they deeply shaped how each side saw the other. The bloc mentality, as you called it, made it super hard for the U.S. to view India's policy outside that East-West lens. It set the stage for, decades of strained relations.
Okay, so that was the past. Quite surprising looking back. But what changed? How did we get from that distance to today's partnership? The '90s and early 2000s you mentioned were transformative. What were the key catalysts?
Well, the big one, obviously, the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, that just removed the main geopolitical barrier right there. Suddenly, India's non-aligned policy. Its whole context shifted. It opened up space to rethink global relationships.
And right around the same time, 1991, India started its major economic liberalization, opening up its economy. And when you open your economy, you need partners, right? The U.S., with its huge market, its tech, suddenly looked very attractive.
Absolutely. And beyond those practical shifts, there was also this growing recognition, maybe quieter, of shared democratic values, pluralism, rule of law, free expression. Despite the past differences, that common ground started to feel more foundational. And you can't discount the Indian diaspora in the U.S., growing rapidly, nearly 5 million strong now. They started playing a really significant role, economically and politically, pushing for stronger ties, building bridges.
Right. And then came 9/11. 2001. The attacks in the U.S. combined with India's own long experience with terrorism, that created a really powerful convergence on counterterrorism, a shared goal. But if there's one moment that signaled a truly massive shift, it has to be that U.S.-India civil nuclear agreement in 2008. Looking at our sources, what made that deal such a watershed? Why was it so pivotal?
Oh, it was absolutely transformative. It wasn't just about nuclear energy. It effectively ended India's nuclear isolation. And crucially, it recognized India as a responsible nuclear power, even though India hadn't signed the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Which was a huge step for the U.S.
A massive symbol of trust.
Yeah.
The U.S. basically said, look, we trust India as a partner, even outside this formal treaty structure. That paved the way for so much deeper strategic cooperation. It really set the tone for everything that came after.
Okay, so that transformation sets the stage perfectly.
Yeah.
Now let's dig into what makes this partnership so solid today. What are these pillars holding up this comprehensive global strategic partnership? Where do you see the strongest collaboration right now?
Defense and security. That's definitely become a cornerstone. In 2016, the U.S. designated India a major defense partner. That basically puts India almost on par with the closest U.S. allies for getting critical defense tech, and it came with STA-1 status, Strategic Trade Authorization 1.
Which speeds things up considerably.
Greatly. Fast tracks access to advanced U.S. defense and dual-use tech.
And it's more than just status, isn't it? It's about actually being able to work together. These foundational agreements, LMOA, COMCASA, BECA, can you briefly remind us what those allow?
Sure. LMOA is for logistics using each other's bases. COMCASA is for secure communications, sharing encrypted systems. And BECA allows sharing of geospatial intelligence. Think maps, satellite imagery for better accuracy with missiles or drones.
Right. These aren't just acronyms, they're the actual plumbing that lets the two militaries operate together effectively.
Precisely. And look at the scale of defense deals. It's striking. The U.S. is now a major supplier for India. Advanced surveillance planes like the P-8I, crucial for the Indo-Pacific, transport aircraft, attack helicopters, and now the recent approval for armed MQ-9B drones, that's top-tier stuff.
They represent a huge strategic shift for India moving away from its historical reliance on Russia, wouldn't you say?
A massive shift towards integrating more deeply with U.S. capabilities, something few would have predicted 20 years ago.
And it's not just buying kit, they're doing complex joint exercises. Malabar, now with Japan and Australia too.
Yeah.
COPE India for air forces, Yuddha Abhyas for armies, Tiger Triumph for disaster relief.
Right. And there's this push towards co-production and co-development, the Defense Industrial Cooperation Roadmap, moving beyond just buyer-seller, looking at maybe Javelin, Strikers under India's Make in India initiative, plus deep intel sharing on counterterrorism continues.
Okay, so defense is clearly huge.
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier, this isn't just about defense. The economies are increasingly intertwined too.
Definitely. As strategic ties deepen, economies often follow. And the growth in India-U.S. economic links has been, well, remarkable.
Yeah, the U.S. is consistently one of India's top trading partners, and they have this ambitious goal, right? $500 billion in bilateral trade by 2030.
That's the target. And interestingly, India usually runs a trade surplus with the U.S.
We're also seeing big investment flows both ways. U.S. FDI into India is significant, and Indian companies, big names like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, have huge operations and investments in India now, contributing back.
And there's this shared strategic goal now of diversifying supply chains, moving away from, over-reliance on China. That's a key driver.
Are they making progress on smoothing out trade issues? Things like tariffs, market access?
There are ongoing talks, trade dialogues trying to resolve disputes, reduce barriers in areas like agriculture, pharma, motorcycles. It's a process. And energy is another big piece. The U.S. is now a major supplier of crude oil and LNG to India, vital for India's energy security. And that partnership also extends into renewables, clean energy tech, so it's forward-looking.
Speaking of forward-looking, technology and innovation seem central. This iCET initiative, the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technology, launched in 2023. That sounds important.
It is. iCET is a really crucial framework. It's focusing cooperation on the real cutting-edge stuff. Think semiconductors. You've got U.S. firms like Micron investing big in chip manufacturing in India. Then there's AI, quantum computing, 5G, 6G, advanced telecom.
And space, too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Space is a big one. The NISAR joint satellite mission plans for the first Indian astronaut to the ISS via NASA and ISRI on an Axiom mission. Plus, India joined the Artemis Accords in 2023, aligning on space exploration norms. iCET also covers biotech, advanced materials. It's broad.
And there's a defense angle to the tech push, too. Indo-SX.
Right. Indo-SX, the India-U.S. Defense Acceleration Ecosystem, also launched in 23. The idea is to connect defense startups, academics, industry in both countries to co-develop next-gen defense tech, linking those innovation hubs.
It really feels like they're trying to build connections at every level.
Yep.
Which brings us to the people-to-people ties, the diaspora influence.
Incredibly vital. You can't overstate it.
Almost 5 million strong now, the Indian-American community. They're such a crucial bridge, aren't they? Highly educated, doing well economically, politically influential, contributing hugely to the U.S. economy, advocating for stronger ties, many in prominent positions, too.
Absolutely. And education links are key. The U.S. is still the top spot for Indian students, over 300,000 of them. That's a huge flow of talent and ideas. Plus, growing university collaborations, joint degrees, maybe even U.S. universities setting up campuses in India.
And culturally, it's a two-way street. Indian food, yoga, Bollywood are big in the U.S. American pop culture is everywhere in India. It's a real exchange.
And all this translates onto the global stage, too. How are India and the U.S. collaborating more broadly?
Well, a huge focus is the Indo-Pacific, a shared vision for a free, open region, especially with China's growing assertiveness. The Quad is the most visible example of that. India, U.S., Japan, Australia, working on maritime security, tech, infrastructure.
Right, and beyond the Quad.
Cooperation on climate change, clean energy. Global health, we saw that during COVID with vaccine work. The U.S. consistently backs India for a permanent seat on a reformed UN Security Council.
That's significant backing.
Yeah. And they collaborate actively in forums like the G20, acknowledging India's leadership role, especially for the Global South.
It really highlights how these different pillars, defense, economy, tech, people, global issues, they all link together, don't they? They're not separate silos. They reinforce each other. The trust from the nuclear deal enables defense tech sharing. Economic ties facilitate tech transfer. The diaspora connects across all areas. It's this interconnectedness that makes it truly a comprehensive global strategic partnership. Each part strengthens the whole.
And the pace just seems to be picking up, especially in the last couple of years. That June 2023 state visit by Prime Minister Modi, that felt like a landmark. Big announcements on iCET, those MQ-9B drones, the GE jet engine deal.
Huge deliverables, and India's G20 presidency in 2023 was seen as very successful, with strong U.S. backing, including for initiatives like IMEC, that India-Middle East-Europe corridor idea.
And the momentum seems to be carrying forward.
Definitely. Continued focus on India-SX, formalizing that defense industrial cooperation roadmap. In space, the NISAR launch is coming up, the astronaut mission plan for 2025. India joining Artemis Accords in 23 was key. Tech partnerships under iCET are pushing ahead in AI, quantum, 5G, 6G, semiconductors. U.S. investment is flowing there.
More educational exchanges, regular high-level talks like the 2+2 ministerial.
Right, and that Mission 500 trade goal doubling trade to $500 billion by 2030. Efforts continue towards maybe a broader trade agreement.
And looking forward, this U.S.-India Compact Initiative launched early 2025, catalyzing opportunities for military partnership, accelerated commerce, and technology.
Yeah, that signals an intent to really drive transformative change, especially positioned against China's influence in the Indo-Pacific. The speed and the forward-looking nature of all this is really striking. It shows a relationship that's not just reacting, but actively building for the future, driven by current global dynamics.
But, even the best partnerships face complexities, right? So as we look ahead, what are the big opportunities? And what are some of the hurdles or challenges that remain?
Well, the opportunities are pretty clear. Geopolitically, there's strong alignment, especially regarding China and maintaining that rules-based order. Economically, the synergy is huge. India's massive growing market, U.S. tech and capital, enormous potential there.
Joint tech leadership, too.
Absolutely. Joint R&D could put both countries at the forefront of innovation globally. And together, they can tackle global challenges more effectively. Plus, you have India's demographic dividend, that young, skilled workforce complementing the U.S. innovation economy.
That's a compelling set of opportunities. But it does raise that question. How do two independent nations balance shared goals with their own specific priorities and histories? What are some of those friction points or challenges our sources highlight?
Well, trade barriers are still an issue. Market access, digital taxes, non-tariff barriers. Those persist and need work to unlock the full economic potential. Then there's India's commitment to strategic autonomy. Its independent foreign policy, including relationships with countries like Russia, that can lead to different positions than the U.S. might prefer, say, on sanctions. It requires careful management.
And on defense, tech transfer. You mentioned progress, but are there still sticking points?
There are. India understandably wants more high-end tech transfer, but U.S. export controls, sometimes domestic industry concerns in the U.S. can slow things down. It's a negotiation. Then occasionally you have U.S. concerns raised about human rights or democratic practices in India. India sees these as internal matters, so that can cause friction.
And practical things like visas.
Yeah, visa issues, especially H-1B backlogs for professionals, remain a concern for many Indians looking to work or study in the U.S.
And that Russia factor you mentioned, how does that play out now, especially with the Ukraine situation?
It's a very delicate balance for India. It maintains defense and energy ties with Russia due to historical links and national interest calculations, even amidst U.S. sanctions pressure. India navigates it carefully. Lastly, differences in areas like data localization policies or cybersecurity frameworks can sometimes complicate digital cooperation. So yeah, it's a complex picture, definitely not without challenges.
It really has been a remarkable journey, hasn't it? The India-U.S. relationship, tracing it from that Cold War distance to this really robust, future-focused global strategic partnership we see today.
Absolutely. And those core drivers we talked about, the shared democratic values, the deepening economic ties, the clear strategic convergence, they've been key. This partnership, it feels vital, not just for India and the U.S. themselves, but really for stability and prosperity regionally and even globally in this century.
So, building on that idea of navigating the opportunities and the challenges, here's a thought to leave you with. As global power keeps shifting and new technologies keep emerging faster than ever, what unforeseen areas of cooperation or maybe even new points of friction might define the next chapter for India and the U.S.? And how might their combined influence continue to reshape the global order?